Before we begin, close your eyes, take a breath. Let the world you know grow distant. What follows is not merely a story, it is a crossing, a descent, a becoming. Let it take you. The moment Vanessa Moore died, she didn't feel pain, only falling. Endless, silent, falling. There was no tunnel of light, no parade of memories, no gentle hand reaching from the other side. There was only the sensation of something vast and cold swallowing her whole, like the universe had simply opened its mouth and decided she was done. She had been crossing the street. A Tuesday. It was raining lightly, the kind of drizzle that clings to eyelashes and makes streetlights look like smeared watercolors. She remembered thinking she needed to pick up coffee. She remembered a flash of headlights, and then nothing. No, not nothing. Falling. Then a voice, soft, ancient, female. The balance is broken. The words didn't travel through air. They moved through her, vibrating in her chest, in the marrow of her bones, in the place behind her eyes where dreams are kept. You will restore it. Vanessa tried to scream. She tried to ask who was speaking, where she was, whether she was dead, but her voice dissolved into the void like smoke. You will be desired. You will be fought over. A pause, a breath that seemed to last centuries. You will survive or be devoured. And then light, and the world shattered open. Before we begin, if you love dark Lycan Kings, forbidden mates, and stories that make your heart ache, comment where you are watching from, and subscribe for epic Lycan King romances, where omegas rise, kings fall, and love is never gentle. A world of beasts. Vanessa woke on cold grass beneath a massive silver moon. Not the pale, distant moon she had known all her life. That dim coin hung above city skylines, always half hidden by smog and the orange bleed of electric light. This moon was different, close, almost violent in its brightness. It didn't suggest night so much as command it. She lay still for a moment, heart hammering, cataloging what she could feel. Cold, damp, the sharp smell of pine resin and something earthier, something alive. Her body ached as if she'd been wrung out and hung to dry. Her palms were flat against the grass, and each blade felt impossibly distinct, impossibly real. She sat up slowly and froze. Towering silhouettes surrounded her. Men, or at least, things that wore the shape of men. Tall, impossibly broad, built like something between architecture and wilderness. And their eyes glowed in the dark, gold, crimson, emerald, predatory, hungry. Vanessa counted them in rapid, terrified silence. 1, 2, 3, 4 sets of burning eyes in the darkness. 4 presences radiating the kind of stillness that only things higher on the food chain can manage. The stillness of something that doesn't need to hurry, one step forward. Tall, broad, power radiating from him like heat from a forge, silver hair that caught the moonlight like liquid metal, eyes of pure amber, burning steady and deep. He moved the way mountains move, slowly, inevitably, with the understanding that the ground shifts to accommodate him and not the other way around. A Lycan King. Something primal in Vanessa's brain screamed at her to run. She stayed perfectly still. Running, some animal instinct whispered, would only make it worse. You smell human, he murmured. His voice was low, resonant, the kind of voice that vibrated the ribcage from across a room. Vanessa swallowed. I think I am. A low chuckle echoed from the shadows, lighter, more musical, with an edge of amusement that felt almost theatrical. Another man emerged from the tree line, slender where the lichen was massive, graceful, fox-like eyes, golden, slanted, clever, catching the light with something that wasn't quite warmth, but wasn't quite cold either. He moved like he was enjoying every step. Oh, she's definitely human, he said smoothly, tilting his head. And completely, thoroughly lost. Then came the third, pale as bleached bone, elegant in the way that sharp things are elegant. Crimson eyes glowing like embers stirred in darkness. He didn't move toward her. He simply was suddenly a few feet closer than he'd been before, as if the space between them had simply decided to be smaller. A vampire. How interesting, he said softly. The words fell like stones into still water. Vanessa's heart pounded so loudly she was certain they could all hear it. She pressed her palms flat on the grass and made herself breathe. I'm not dreaming. I am absolutely not dreaming. The grass is too cold and the moon is too close, and these things are looking at me like I am a problem they haven't decided how to solve yet. I'm trapped. Torture claimed by power. I'll take her. The Lycan King's voice cut through the night air like a blade drawn from its sheath. Clean. Final. Not a suggestion. No, the fox replied instantly, and his easy smile didn't waver, even as he stepped closer to Vanessa, placing himself, with casual precision, between her and the others. She came into my territory first. That's law even you must acknowledge, Kale. The Lycan King, Kale, narrowed his amber eyes. A muscle jumped in his jaw. The vampire tilted his head. His voice was perfectly level. You're both mistaken. She belongs to no one. And no one's claim precedes what she decides for herself. Vanessa blinked. Then, something crystallized. Wait. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. All three of them turned to look at her. The weight of their attention was physical, like standing under a waterfall. I belong to myself. Silence. Then laughter. Deep, dark, dangerous. The Lycan King's amusement was a low rumble, almost reluctant. The fox's was bright and genuine. The vampire merely allowed the ghost of a smile. You don't understand this world, the Lycan King said, and there was no cruelty in his tone, only the flat certainty of someone stating weather facts. In this realm, humans don't survive alone. They aren't built for it. The magic here reads you, tests you, and the predators in these forests make us look gentle. Vanessa got to her feet. Her legs were unsteady, but she refused to sway. Then I'll survive differently. The fox's golden eyes lit up with something that looked dangerously like delight. Oh, and I like her. The vampire regarded her the way a jeweler regards an unusual stone, with interest and calculation in equal measure. So do I. A low hiss cut through the conversation, not threatening, deliberate, announcing. They turned, a fourth presence. He had been there the whole time, still, silent, wrapped in shadow as naturally as others wear clothing. Lean, built like tension coiled in human form. His eyes were the pale gold green of venom in a vial, catching the moonlight without warmth. A snake rogue, unaligned, unbound, the most dangerous kind of anything. You're all wasting time, he said, his voice cold and almost bored. She's already marked by fate. This conversation is theater. Vanessa's breath caught. She looked down at her hands instinctively, half expecting to see something written there. Marked? The Lycan King's expression shifted. Something moved behind his amber eyes. Complex, unreadable. Yes, he said, and that changes everything. The unexpected bond. Vanessa didn't choose them. Fate did. And fate, it turned out, was both more efficient and more inconvenient than anything she could have arranged herself. One by one, they refused to leave her. The Lycan King, Kyle, was dominant in the most absolute sense. Not aggressive, precisely. He didn't rage or posture. He simply occupied space with such total authority that the world seemed to rearrange around him. He appeared at the edges of her days like a recurring weather system, inevitable, impossible to ignore, and periodically making it very difficult to think straight. The fox, Sable, he'd eventually admitted his name was, were with a smile that suggested giving her even that much was a performance. Was playful in the way that knives are playful, He teased, he deflected. He said 3 true things in a row, and then 1 complete lie, and dared you to figure out which was which. He watched her constantly, but never when she looked directly at him. The vampire, whose name was Lucian, offered with the weary grace of someone who had been giving his name for so many centuries it had lost its weight, was calm and calculating in silence. He didn't speak often. When he did, every word had been pre-selected. He lingered, always a little longer than necessary, stayed after the others left, read ostensibly, but the book never seemed to advance. The snake, Riven, remained unpredictable in all things except the steadiness of his observation. He was terrifyingly good at seeing through people. He said very little. What he said tended to be accurate in ways that were uncomfortable. And then, as if the universe had decided that 4 impossibly powerful supernatural beings vying for her attention wasn't enough of a logistical challenge, more came. A lion warrior arrived one dawn, like a golden storm, blazing with the kind of pride that wasn't arrogance because he'd actually earned it. His name was Aurelius, and he brought with him a warmth that was almost disarming, if you forgot that warmth was also what fire felt like. A panther assassin materialized from shadow itself. She learned his name was Shade only because he told her, and she got the impression telling her was a significant concession. He moved without sound on any surface, whereas she caught him watching her from impossible angles. He never explained himself. A Phoenix Lord arrived in a cascade of embers that burned gold and didn't char the grass beneath his feet. Ash was his name. He spoke quietly, but when he did, something in the air changed temperature. And lastly, impossibly, a merman prince surfaced in the river that bordered the forest's edge. Tide. He was the only one who seemed completely at peace with the situation, which Vanessa found either reassuring or deeply suspicious depending on the day. 8 beings, 8 supernatural powers, 8 different ideas about what she was, what she meant, and what should be done about her. And all of them arguing about it at the same time. Vanessa sat in the center of them one night, the fire crackling, the moon watching, a half-eaten piece of bread in her hand, and listened to them debate her fate with the focused patience of someone who had decided to make a plan. Enough! Silence fell instantly. Even Kyle, who she was fairly certain had never been interrupted in his life, went still. She stood. She was exhausted. She was also, somewhere beneath the exhaustion, beginning to understand something important about herself. She was not as frightened as she should be, and she intended to use that. "If you're all going to stay," she said, "then we do this my way." Sable the fox raised one eyebrow. "Oh, I'm curious. We make a schedule." A pause. "A what?" "The schedule." She paced. 8 supernatural predators of immeasurable power watched her stride back and forth in the firelight like she was running a military briefing. Kale's expression suggested this was the most bewildering experience of his 400-year existence. Sable looked like he was trying not to laugh. Lucian had gone perfectly still. "You all want time with me," she said, and the word want was placed with precise deliberateness. "You have all made this extremely clear. So here is what happens. We organize it." She pointed. "Aurelius, Lion. Monday, we'll train. You clearly want to teach me things, so teach me." Aurelius blinked, then nodded slowly, something pleased moving behind his golden eyes. "Sable, Fox. Tuesday. You like talking. Fine, we talk. But every third thing you tell me has to be actually true." The fox pressed a hand to his chest as if wounded. He was delighted. "Riven, Snake, Wednesday. You want to observe me. So I observe you back." The snake's pale eyes narrowed fractionally. He said nothing, which meant she was learning. Something between agreement and impressed. "Tied up, merman. Thursday. You've been asking me about my world. So we trade. You teach me about yours." Tide smiled, slow, like sunrise over water. He nodded. "Shade, Panther. Friday. You can keep following me around. But in the light, not the shadows. That's the deal." A long pause from the darkness. Then, barely audible, a single sound of ascent. Ash, Phoenix, Saturday. Ash looked at her steadily. Something burned quietly behind his dark eyes. What do you want from me? She met his gaze. Honesty. You seem like the only one of you who won't perform it. The fire crackled. His expression didn't change, but something in it, very subtly, opened. She paused, took a breath. And Sunday, all eyes shifted. The air tensed. Even Lucian leaned forward slightly. The Lycan King stood very still. His jaw was set. His amber eyes watched her with an intensity that would have felt like aggression on a less controlled face. Vanessa crossed her arms. Lucian, vampire, Sunday. Lucian's expression remained perfectly composed, but his crimson eyes brightened. The smallest fraction, a silence. Then Kale said, with precise quietness, "And me?" She looked at him for a moment. "You get every day that doesn't go according to plan, which based on what I've seen of this world, will be most of them." The silence stretched. Then the fox burst into laughter, bright, genuine, helpless. "This is insane," he managed. Lucian looked at her with something that was almost, a not quite warmth. "And yet, brilliant." Kale crossed his arms. His expression was unreadable. "You think this will stop conflict?" Vanessa met his gaze. "No, but it'll stop me from collapsing. And if I collapse, none of this means anything. Does it?" A beat, then another. He uncrossed his arms. The schedule held. The price of power days turned into weeks. And weeks in this world of beasts and moonlight moved differently than they did in the one Vanessa had been pulled from. The rhythm here was older, more honest in some ways. The sky said things. Storms brewed that matched the moods of the land, and the moon cycled with a weight that she could feel in her chest. She trained with Aurelius. He was a patient teacher once she stopped expecting him to be condescending. He approached her education with a warrior seriousness, which was its own form of respect. She learned to fall without flinching. She learned the way this world's magic moved through bodies when it was welcomed rather than feared. Her Tuesdays with Sable became something she looked forward to with more honesty than she admitted aloud. He was infuriating and brilliant, and laughed at things that weren't jokes and turned genuine things into performance, and somewhere in the middle of all of it, told her things that were true in ways he'd never say directly. She kept count. He knew she kept count. They didn't discuss it. Reuben said less than anyone, but she noticed that he'd stopped holding himself quite so separate from the group. He still stood apart, but closer apart. Tide taught her the language of water, not literally, but in the way that spending time near something vast and patient slowly teaches you to be still. She liked their Thursdays. He was uncomplicated in a way none of the others managed. Shade never did leave the shadows entirely, but she started finding small things left in obvious places. A useful knife here, a piece of strange fruit she hadn't seen before there, and she stopped pretending she didn't know where they came from. Ash gave her honesty like it cost him something. She suspected it did. He'd been performing calm for so long that the real version of him, uncertain, watching, carrying something old and heavy, was almost startling when it showed itself. Lucian listened. That was his gift. When everyone else talked, offered, challenged, or competed, he listened. She suspected he had been listening so long that he had accumulated entire libraries of other people's inner lives and kept them perfectly. And Kyle. Kyle was, as predicted, everywhere the plan broke down, which was often. He appeared during storms, during arguments, during the 3 separate occasions she nearly got killed by things that were not the 8 beings she was already managing. He didn't explain himself. He didn't apologize for being there. He simply was, present, watching, handling whatever needed handling, and stepping back before she could thank him. She was beginning to understand that this was his version of tenderness. It was an extremely inconvenient thing to understand. But peace, real peace, never lasts. One night, sleep adjacent and not quite dreaming, Vanessa heard voices from the corridor of the ancient hall that the group had collectively wordlessly, decided was where they gathered. She lay still, listened. She's the key. If she chooses one, the rest will fall. The bond is unstable. It was never designed to hold 8. It was designed to hold 1. A longer pause. Then a voice she didn't recognize. Older, rougher. If she doesn't choose by the blood moon, the decision will be made for her. And it won't be gentle. Vanessa's eyes opened in the dark. Her chest felt hollow. This isn't about love. It never was. It's about power. It has always been about power. She is not a person to this world. She is a mechanism. A key, they said. Something for a lock she hasn't even seen yet. She stared at the ceiling until the voices faded. Then she started planning. Hannah, the war begins. The first fight shattered the forest in the small hours before dawn. She heard it before she saw it. The crack of an ancient tree. The deep, concussive boom of 2 impossible things colliding with no intention of yielding. She ran toward it rather than away from it, which was either brave or stupid, and she'd stopped being able to tell the difference. Cal and Aurelius had cleared a 1/4 acre of tree line. Lucian moved between them like cold water, trying to separate them and doing nothing of the sort. Sable was in the trees above, having apparently decided that height was the appropriate response to lion and wolf energy at war. Shade was shadow close to Kael's blind side in a way that suggested he was waiting for an opening. Riven had gone completely still, a coiled, we're-ready stillness that meant he had already picked a side and was simply waiting for the optimal moment. Ash burned, not aggressively, but steadily in a way that made the air around him hot and the light strange, and the distance between him and a decision get smaller. Tide was not present. She would later find out he had been in the river, having correctly assessed that entering this would change nothing. Claws, fire, venom, shadows, all of it accelerating toward something irreversible. Vanessa pushed through the last of the tree line and saw all of it at once. Stop! The word came out of her like something released rather than spoken. And the ground moved, not violently, no earthquake, no drama, just a pulse. Outward from where she stood, moving through the roots and the soil and the air. A wave of something that had no name in the language she'd grown up with, but that every living thing in a half-mile radius recognized. Everything stopped, even Kael, even Ash Midburn. Even the forest seemed to hold its breath. Vanessa stood in the clearing with her hands at her sides, staring at them, trying to understand what had just moved through her. She looked at her hands. What am I? The silence that followed was long, the kind of silence that has weight, the kind that precedes confession. Lucian was the one who finally spoke. He had been watching her, not with the hunger she'd grown used to reading in all of them, but with something that looked more like sorrow. You're not just human. Riven's voice followed, from the shadows where he'd returned to. You're the center of this world's balance. You were chosen because the old magic recognized something in you. A resonance. You don't just exist in this world. You are why it holds together. She looked at Kael. He met her gaze directly, which he always did, but there was something new in it. Something that looked almost like guilt. How long have you known? He didn't look away. Since the first night. She nodded, filed it away, continued to breathe. All right, she said quietly. Then we need to talk. Honestly, all of us. Tonight. No one argued, for perhaps the first time since she'd arrived. The choice they gathered around the fire she built. Not the one that maintained itself by some passive magic, but a real fire. With real wood, she split herself with an axe that was too heavy for her, and she swung anyway. They watched her build it. None of them offered to help. She understood later that this was the first time they'd deferred to her intentionally, rather than in response to power. She told them everything, what she'd overheard, the blood moon, the choice, the consequences. They listened without interrupting, even Sable. When she finished, the silence lasted long enough that the fire settled twice. Then they spoke. One by one, not competing. The schedule, she thought with a ghost of dark humor, had trained them. Aurelius first, with his warrior's honesty, the kind that doesn't soften. I came here because the magic called and I answered, but I stayed because of you. That's the whole truth of it. Sable, without the performance for once, eyes steady, a voice quieter than she'd ever heard it. I stay because you're the only thing in 300 years that has surprised me, and I have never, not once, wanted to be predictable around you. Riven, you see me, not what I am past that. No one has done that. Tied softly from where he sat near the fire's edge. My world is deep and dark and quiet. You are none of those things. I think that's why I keep coming back to the surface. Shade from the shadows, always the shadows. 3 words. I choose you. Ash looking directly into the fire. I burn because I have to. But this, being here, is the first thing in a very long time that I chose. Lucian last, as always, because he had been listening, and because his words were always the most precisely selected. I have watched the world change for 6 centuries, and I have been waiting without knowing I was waiting, for something worth remaining for. And finally, Kyle. He stood, came to her, stopped 3 feet away, which was, she'd learned, his version of restraint. Choose me, he said. I will protect you from everything. I will stand between you and whatever the blood moon demands, and I will not step aside. She looked at him for a long moment, then she stood, and she turned, turning in a slow circle, looking at all of them, letting each face register. These 8 impossible beings who had come from different corners of a world she hadn't known existed, who had competed and circled and argued and, in their different ways, changed around her. The fire crackled. The moon waited. I choose. Silence stretched. She felt the tension like a physical thing. 8 heartbeats she had learned to recognize going still. Myself. Shock moved through them like a current. I'm not a key, she said, and her voice didn't shake. I'm not a mechanism. I'm not a throne to be occupied or a balance to be held in someone else's hands. If this world's stability runs through me, then it runs through me. Through what I decide. Through who I decide to be. She looked at Kale directly. I'm not here to be owned. Not by fate. Not by magic. Not by you. She looked at all of them. I'm here to change this world. And if you want to help with that, then help. But not as owners. As allies. As equals. Another silence. Longer. Then Sable said very quietly, with no performance in it at all, I'm in. One by one. They all were. Queen of beasts, time passed. The blood moon came. It hung in the sky the color of a wound and waited for a sacrifice that didn't come. Because Vanessa Moore stood beneath it, with her feet planted on the earth, and looked up at it and felt the ancient pressure of the choice it demanded, and let the pressure pass through her, like wind through an open window. The old magic waited, then it adjusted. This was the thing it hadn't anticipated. She wasn't rejecting the bond. She was redefining it. A bond that moved through one person into one other, that created a hierarchy, a possession, a dependency, had to break something to sustain itself. A bond that moved through one person outward equally, that didn't require choosing, required something else entirely. It required the center to be strong enough to hold. She was. The fighting stopped, not all at once and not without setbacks. Old habits, old needs don't dissolve in a moment. Kel still positioned himself between her and danger without asking. Sable still withheld more than he gave. Riven still watched from distances that were a little too careful. These things didn't vanish. But they changed. Kel began to ask. Sable began to stay. Riven began to speak, not often but genuinely. The schedule became something different from what it had started as. It had begun as triage. It became ritual. It became, though none of them would have said this word because they were all too proud or too careful or too old for easy language. Home. She grew stronger, not in the way they had expected. They had anticipated raw power, the kind that comes with chosen bonds and blood moon ceremonies and magical inevitability. What she grew instead was something more difficult to define and more difficult to counter. She grew certain, certain of what she knew and what she didn't, certain of what she would and wouldn't accept, certain. And this was the thing that changed everything, that the choice to be here, in this world, moving through it by her own will, was not something that had been taken from her. It was something she was making, every day, actively, regardless of what fate had intended. They stopped seeing her as something to possess. It was gradual, the way large things always change, in increments too small to notice day by day, suddenly impossible to deny when you look back. Aurelius began to ask her opinion in council. It genuinely waited. Lucian began to bring her information, not to control what she knew, but because he decided her knowing things made the world safer. Even Kale, proud, immovable Kale, was observed by Sable, who told Vanessa because Sable could not resist, bending slightly at the neck in acknowledgement of her decision, once when he thought no one was watching. Sable had been watching. He always was. He also had the good sense not to tease Kale about it, more than once. The other factions of this world, the territorial lords, the ancient courts, the things that moved at the edges of civilization and tested its boundaries, began to notice her. Not as a human anomaly, not as a mechanism of prophecy, as something else, a force, a ruler, a queen. No one crowned her. No ceremony happened. There was no moment of official declaration. There was only this. The day that the three oldest factions in the forest, who had been at war with one another for 200 years, sent representatives to the hall where she held council. Not to the 8 beasts she stood among, but to her, and asked with the particular careful formality of things that are very old and very proud and very reluctant to ask for anything. Would you arbitrate? She looked at Kyle. He gave her nothing, kept his expression perfectly still, letting her decide. She looked at Sable. He tilted his head just slightly, interested. She looked at all of them. Then she turned back to the representatives and said, "Tell me everything." And the world, slowly, irrevocably, rearranged itself around her. Akura, the one who watches far beyond the forest, far beyond the territories and the courts and the ancient factional wars that Vanessa Moore was, even now, carefully untangling with her particular brand of stubborn, pragmatic grace. In a place that existed between places, in a darkness that was not the absence of light, but something older, something that predated light, that had been there before the first sun burned and expected to still be there after the last one cooled. A figure stirred. It had no name that any living thing still used. Names require speakers, and the things that had known this entity by its true name had ceased to exist before the current world's oldest trees were seeds. What remained were echoes, fragments lodged in prophecy texts that crumbled at the touch, and in stone carvings that predated language, in the very oldest memories of the very oldest beings, buried beneath centuries of survival instinct. The 8 had felt it, each in their own way, at the margins of their awareness, a pressure at the edge of deep sleep, a wrongness in the quality of silence during the dark of new moons. Cal had called it Old Wind. Lucian had stopped naming it at some point in the last several hundred years, because naming things gives them a handle, and he had decided not to give this one anything to hold on to. They had not told Vanessa. This was, as they were beginning to understand, becoming a recurring problem. The figure in the between space observed. It had been watching since the girl fell through the veil, had in fact been watching since before that, since the fracture that made her crossing possible had been identified as a possibility, which was a very different thing from an accident. Accidents, in the economy of ancient power, are nearly impossible. Nearly everything is intention. The question is only whose. The experiment progresses, the figure said. Its voice, if it could be called that, was not sound in the conventional sense. It was more like the way certain thoughts arrive, not formed by your own mind, but landing there anyway, uninvited, fully formed. She has refused the single bond. Interesting. The last three refused nothing. They chose immediately, and the choosing destroyed them in one way or another. She has found a third path. A pause, the darkness breathed. But balance, real balance, demands a cost. The old law is not a suggestion. It cannot be reasoned with or restructured. It existed before reason. It will exist after. Something moved in the dark. Not the figure, something else. Something that circled it. Vast, patient, formless. The distributed bond she has created is elegant. I will grant her that. 8 anchors instead of 1. The load spread. The magic accommodated because magic is water. It finds the shape of what contains it. A low sound, not quite a laugh. But water also floods. The figure rose. If rising was the right word for the movement of something that didn't precisely have a body, it expanded. It oriented. The balance she holds is real, but it is held by 8 connections, each of which passes through her. She is the confluence, the meeting point, and meeting points, when the tide changes, the darkness shuddered. Hepenu, bear the full force of everything that flows through them. The formless thing that circled drew closer. I did not design this to be cruel, the figure said, and there was something in it that might, in a different context, have been almost genuine. I designed it to find something that hasn't existed in this world for a very long time. Something that can hold the center without breaking. Something that does not need to be owned to stay. Another pause. Every candidate before her chose possession, chose to belong to something, because the fear of falling apart alone is, in most living things, more powerful than the fear of what holding on costs them. The voice thinned to almost nothing. She chose differently. A long silence. So now I have to decide. The darkness contracted. Do I test the thing that survived, or acknowledge that the thing I was looking for has arrived? The trial was designed to end in collapse. I built the pressure to break whatever it found, because the world has no use for a balance that holds in easy times, only in the moments that demand everything. The voice dropped lower, more internal than external now. And when she breaks, if she breaks, everything falls with her. The 8, the forest, the factions. The world she has, quite remarkably, already begun to reshape, a shadow twisted within shadow. But if she doesn't break, the sentence went unfinished, hung there in the ancient dark, as if even this entity, older than language, patient as geology, was not entirely certain what came after. Back in the world. Back in the hall with firelight and 8 impossible beings who had become, in all the ways that mattered, and some they hadn't cataloged yet, her people. Vanessa stood under the window through which the moon fell, in the hour before everyone else woke, when the world was in that particular blue suspension between night and morning. She stood with a cup of something warm that tide had taught her to make from river herbs, and ash had adjusted the temperature of with such casual precision that she stopped commenting on it. She stood and she felt it. She'd been feeling it for days, a pressure at the edge of things. Not threatening exactly. More like the feeling before weather turns. The feeling that the air knows something the body hasn't processed yet. Something is coming. She didn't know what it was. She didn't know if the 8 knew and weren't saying, though she was fairly certain at least Kale and Lucian knew something, because Kale had been stationing himself with slightly more deliberateness at borders, and Lucian had been reading older and older texts with a quality of focus she'd learned to recognize as him, trying to find something he wasn't sure he wanted to find. She had not asked. Not yet. She was still figuring out which question to ask first. But here is what Vanessa Moore knew, standing in the blue pre-morning with her warm cup and her moon. She had died on a Tuesday in the rain, thinking about coffee. She had landed in a world she didn't know, surrounded by beings that could have killed her before she learned their names. She had made a schedule. She had refused a blood moon, while she had stood in a clearing and made the earth listen. She had not been broken by any of it. Something was coming, something old and vast and patient in the way that only things very confident in their own power can be patient. Something that had apparently been watching her from the beginning. She didn't know its name. She didn't know what it wanted. She didn't know if she'd survive it, but she was fairly certain, and this certainty was a new thing, clean and hard as riverstone, that whatever came next, the choice would be hers. Not fate's, not the ancient thing in the darks, not the eight's. Hers. She took a sip of her drink. She watched the sky lighten. She began to plan. End of extended edition. Beast husbands, all powerful and dominant.